In a world where it seems totally normal to listen to a podcast about the Toronto Argonauts, it's the X's and Argos podcast.
Welcome to the X's and Argos podcast, brought to you by Funny Bone Broth. My name is Ben Grant. I'm joined as always by JB, and we've got another exciting week for you as we finally get a chance to talk about the Henoc Muamba signing, which happened, I believe, 1 minute after we finished our podcast last week, JB. In typical Argos fashion, they wait for us to wrap up whatever it is we're doing, and then send out a giant news story that we can't talk about for 6 days, 23 hours, and 59 minutes.
Yeah, it was poorly timed by the organization, in truth.
I took credit for that in initiating the Murphy's Law effect. So we finished the podcast. Something great is bound to happen as soon as we upload it and put it out there. So again, we finished the podcast and suddenly we have the middle linebacker that we were looking for, the answer to our prayers, Henoc Muamba. What do you think about the signing? Like you talking about this leading up to this, you thought this would be a pretty big deal if we could get Muamba.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really excited. He fills one of the last gaps that we have. He's an elite linebacker. I think that I don't know why Montreal didn't sign him, or if he really just wanted to come to Toronto and he wanted out of Montreal, because the contract obviously is not ridiculous money. So
yeah, that was a really fortunate thing for the Argos, and it certainly made the rest of the league really angry, which I love. But yeah, he wanted to play at home. He wanted to be at home where his family is. He grew up in Mississauga. He played at Father Gates Catholic Secondary in Mississauga, and just wanted to be back home around Toronto. And so, this is a great situation, I guess, for both sides. He's able to play in his close to his home city, and the Argos were able to snag one of the best, if not the best, middle linebacker and Canadian Player of the Year, Henoc Muamba. So,
well, I mean, I'm as I'm wont to be. I'm of two minds of this, or I'm a little split. One mind, I'm really excited because I think it really bolsters the lineup. But on the other hand, God, it feeds my fear that a lot of teams in this league think there's going to be no season. And they're really just not competing for these names. And the Argos keep racking up names and everybody else just keeps staring at their cards.
First of all, there weren't a lot of teams that would have been looking for a middle linebacker. Most of the CFL has sorted out their situation at middle linebacker. But there's also the fact that he wouldn't have signed for the same amount of money in other cities. So if another city had wanted to sign him, it probably wouldn't have been the same contract number. I think this is a hometown discount sort of situation. And so the Argos were lucky in that regard. And with a lot of these signings too, and I know your way of looking at it, I get it, but I think with a lot of these players, especially the guys coming in from the States or the guys born in and around the GTA, there was only one team they were looking to sign with. It was a city they knew and recognized in some cases, and that was the only CFL team that they were going to play for. And maybe that has to do a little bit with the pandemic situation. Maybe that has to do just with the climate in general at the moment. But for whatever reason, they want to sign with Toronto. Toronto's only too happy to have them. And the rest of the league is furious about it. And they wouldn't be if they felt like there wasn't going to be a season. They would be saying, go ahead, sign all the guys you want.
I guess I wouldn't say I don't think I would go as far as some other teams don't think there's going to be a season. Maybe I've overstated. But I think that there are a number of teams that are hedging their bet. And so while they may not be anti-season, I wouldn't say that they are full steam ahead. I think at least half the league is being very conservative because they believe it's a 50-50 scenario.
I'll meet you somewhere in the middle there because I still don't buy that. But what I will buy is that teams know they're going to lose money this year. That every team knows they're going to lose money this year, regardless of what happens. And I think they believe there will be a season, but I think they believe there will be a season with either reduced capacity or no fans or something of that nature. They think they're going to lose money, and they may as well lose less money than they were otherwise going to. So I'll go as far as that. I'm still not sure that's the case, but I can accept that reality. I don't think I would go any further than that, though.
Maybe. I mean, they canceled the season last year. I know there were health issues as well, but at the end of the day, they made a business decision that they would rather not run than run an abbreviated or a fanless season. And I'm just not sure how much has changed from last fall. In truth, I know people are getting vaccinated and there's some optimism there, but I don't think that the scenario facing the league is substantially different right now than it was last August. And that's concerning to me because we know what they decided last August.
Well, despite the gloom and doom, and regardless of what every other team in the league thinks,
wet blanket of truth, I believe.
Yes, wet blanket of truth. Regardless of what everyone else thinks, the bottom line is we've got Henoc Muamba. They don't, and so until there isn't a season, let's celebrate. Let's go to town.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, I think the team looks really good at every position. I think, we've talked about there's some, there's still some hopes and maybes on the roster, but the backbone of the team is looking, which is what I was concerned about. The backbone of the team in terms of known players who are going to be elite is really strong. I mean, I think the core of the team, although they're all random guys from random places, I think the core of the team has the potential to be good. And if we hit on a few of the lottery tickets, then I think we have the chance to be great.
Yeah, I think there's still some question at defensive back. I actually feel pretty good about everywhere else, actually. I'm not 100% on defensive back, and we can talk about that another time. But what's so funny is that linebacker went from being a huge concern. It was probably our biggest concern going into what we thought was going to be the 2020 season. And there were so many question marks there. And now you look at our starting linebackers, and we're really just talking about two spots here, talking about the Mac and the Will, where you've got Henoc Muamba and Cameron Judge, the Canadian Player of the Year and the runner-up, both starting in the same linebacking core is pretty awesome. And then even if you decide to include that Sam backer, we've got a ton of guys at Sam that can play. I think one thing that concerned me a little bit before I get into that, did you have a chance to see the video that was going around social media of Henoc explaining to his daughter that he was no longer an Alouette?
No.
It's amazing. You have to see it. And for anyone listening, if you haven't seen this video yet, you have to find it and check it out. I believe the Argos retweeted it, and it came initially from his own account. And he was explaining to his little girl that he's no longer an Alouette, that he's an Argo. And she keeps insisting, no, Alouette. And he looks at the camera. He's like, this is going to be really difficult. But she had obviously become very attached to him being an Alouette and was singing about it and really excited about it, but was not at all pleased to hear that he was going to be playing for the Argonauts. So I don't know how that's going. We'll need an update video from Henoc at some point to see if she's embraced the fact that he's now an Argo. But it was funny because when I saw that, I was thinking that's probably what all the Alouette fans are going through, a similar reaction at him suddenly playing for the Toronto Argonauts. So beyond that story, I was a little, when we signed him, obviously there was the initial excitement, but then I started wondering about his play. And I was thinking, because I know he won most outstanding Canadian, but his stats weren't as good. They weren't nearly as good as the year before, which is often the case with awards like that. You often win awards based on previous accomplishments. And he had a good season, certainly, in 2019, but it wasn't as good as his 2018 season, which was unreal. And so I went back, and I haven't watched his whole season back again, but I did watch the games against the Argonauts. a few others in there as well. To me, this looks like, and again, based on a very small sample size, this looks like a system related thing and not a performance or ability related thing. He didn't look slower to me. He didn't look hesitant in contact to me. There were a few missed tackles here and there, but it wasn't something that jumped off the screen at me. It was just that Montreal, and I don't know, again, if this was just something they did when they played Toronto, but there were a ton of blitzes from the defensive backs, and their linebackers were backing up and catching and going into coverage and taking a couple of read steps and dropping, but they weren't playing nearly as aggressively. Most of the heat was coming from the secondary, specifically from the halfbacks. And I think that probably played into his stats looking a little different. Just watching him move around the field, I had absolutely no concern at the end of watching some of that film. There was nothing in there to suggest that he's lost a step.
Once again, with all of these signings, I think it is going to be a great test for the coaching staff. Are you able to put the players in the best possible scenario? Are you able to evaluate the player and know what they're good at and then do that? And you would think that would be obvious, but that's just not the case with a lot of teams. So I am really curious to see how flexible the Argos plan is for all of these new players. Do they put them in a position to be their best, or do they try and make the player adapt to the system, which I hope they don't?
Yeah, and I know we don't have too much of an idea as to what Coach Young is thinking about as defensive coordinator, because we haven't seen him do it before. Something that the few hints we got came from guys we talked to last year, like Craig Rowe, for example, who I talked to about this time a year ago. And he talked about expecting Coach Young to have a very aggressive defense. And I took that to mean lots of blitzing, taking chances, a lot of man coverage. And if that's the case, I think that does put this group in a pretty positive scenario. If you can lock up in 1 or 0 and let those linebackers just read and react to the run and blitz and find lanes and get after the quarterback, I think this is a pretty nice group to do that. And the other thing that it does is there's a pretty intimidating middle of the field suddenly when you look not only the two linebackers we've been talking about, but the defensive tackle possibilities here, whether it's Fabian Foote and Drake Nevis or Justin Thomas, Thornton, Ely, Oakman. Like, we have no idea who's going to be in the middle there. But this is not a place a lot of running backs are going to be excited about running into. And that's going to affect the play calling of the opposition. It's going to make everyone's job easier. And I talked about being concerned about the secondary a little bit, and maybe we don't have all the pieces there. It may not matter that much, because with all of these signings at defensive end, defensive tackle, linebacker, you notice the first guys to react on social media are the corners and safeties, who are so excited because they know how much easier it makes their job when you can get pressure from everywhere else and they're not stuck covering for 5 or 6 seconds.
Yeah, I'm excited about the roster. I often look at things through a coaching lens, and it is, the GM has found talent. Now the question will be, can the coaches, this, we talked about this before, this is a brand new coaching staff, and initially they were all hired as a rebuild crew. And now they're being hired as a veteran take a run at the cup crew. And those are two very different animals. And I'm really curious to see, they've had a year. Hopefully that year was one where they were developing. But this coaching staff is going to have to hit the ground running. Like, they don't have a season to teach their system. This thing is going to have to run quickly. So I'm really curious to see how well they're able to adapt new players into a system. I mean, you have to think the system is going to have to be pretty simple to add this many players, and for the system to be usable right away. So I think it's a real change for a coaching staff that had some cushion and now no longer does.
I think the positive thing that I'm thinking about on the defensive side of the ball certainly is that Coach Young isn't that far removed from playing. He remembers what it's like to play. He's aware of what these guys bring. He knows what they can do and will be excited, I think, to showcase that. And I think it's maybe an easier transition for a younger coach as opposed to someone who's been around the league forever, has a defensive system that they've used for the last 20 years, and you know that there's no way they're going to bend from that. This is what got them there. This is what they're going to live and die with. And Coach Young isn't that guy. He's working with not a blank canvas, because he's certainly taken things from the stops that he's made along the way. I would imagine we're going to see a similar defensive scheme to what we saw in Winnipeg, because why would you stray too far from that? But that being said, I wouldn't be surprised if he's a little bit more open to putting guys in positions to make plays and to be successful. And honestly, that's what Winnipeg was doing anyway. They were making the most of the talent they had. So I don't see any reason why Coach Young won't continue to do that. And as I said, I think the fact that he's young is helpful in this case, even though you don't normally associate young coach with the guy that you want leading a team of veterans. I actually think that might work out well, at least on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, it reminds me of that old coaching adage that, if you have a can of red paint, paint the barn red.
That's a great quote. You know what I was thinking about when I started putting together the depth chart for the middle linebacker spot is, what do you think this Muamba signing means for Bear Woods?
Well, I think that honestly, I think that it probably puts him closer to a camp cut than he would have been before. I know he restructured, so, it would seem harsh to restructure a guy and then cut him. So I think the restructure probably shows that they plan to keep him. I don't think they would have restructured if they thought that signing Muamba meant the end of Bear. I think that you have him there as a veteran presence, and you have him on the field, especially at the beginning. I think you try and take that as far as you can go. I think they've signed him to be a coach on the field to some extent. So I expect him to play the whole season.
It's interesting though, because Muamba was that coach on the field in Montreal. He was the guy that got everyone fired up on the sidelines and coming out of the tunnel first. He was that guy, and Bear is also that guy. Now, how does that play out? Is that something you even want? Because I had viewed Bear as, before we signed Muamba, and when we went through those periods where, I know you and I were hoping it would happen, had our fingers crossed, but it looked like if they couldn't get him, the plan was for Bear to start at middle linebacker and show Jack Cassar the ropes, have someone for Jack to watch, to emulate, and maybe mid-season, later in the season, if he needed to take over, he could. But the plan was to have Bear starting there while Jack played some special teams and learned the ropes. Now with Muamba in there, how far back do you want to put a guy like Jack Cassar if that is your plan at middle linebacker? Now, I know you typically carry more linebackers on your team. Like, it wasn't unusual last year to see the Argos stack their will position with 4 or 5 guys on game day, because a lot of those guys are playing specials. Bear Woods is not going to be a guy that you're sending out there to partake in a lot of special teams. Are you going to take up a roster spot on game day with both Muamba and Woods, who probably aren't going to be playing much, if anything, in the way of specials, and throw Judge in there too? So, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I wouldn't be surprised to find Woods as a camp cut. I hope not, because he's a guy I like. I think he's great for the team. I don't know that he's got a role here now, and that concerns me. And maybe they hang on to him because you never know in football, and injuries happen, and certainly there'd be a place for him here. But remember, he wasn't playing football until halfway through 2019. A lot of people thought that was it. That was it for Bear, and his career had finished. And then suddenly he reemerged, and like Lazarus returned to the double blue and finished off the season really well. So I don't know. I think I would at this point be surprised if we get to opening day and Bear Woods is on the team. That said, what do I know? We'll have to see. So you wrote a piece that came out today that I want to talk about a little bit, because you've been dropping hints at this ever since we started doing this together. The idea of a football day in Canada. And actually, even before that, I know years ago, you used to talk about how annoyed you'd get at the fact that the CFL wouldn't take advantage of quiet days in other sports and just do an all CFL day. So this has been brewing in you for, I would guess, close to a decade now. So why don't you tell us about Football Day in Canada?
Well, I mean, I think it's not a dazzlingly original idea. I think you look at Hockey Day in Canada has been a success now for going on 20 years, and I don't see why football shouldn't have the same. One of my pet peeves, pre-pandemic, was always the day after the Major League Baseball All-Star Game was a day in the sports calendar where there wasn't a single sporting event. And American media was absolutely dry of any sports. And yet, the CFL never scheduled a game on that Wednesday night after the All-Star Game.
And it wasn't like it was just one game. Like, they didn't schedule one.
No, it used to drive me bonkers. I was like, what? You literally have the attention of North America for a day. Why are you not playing 3 football games on this day? Why is this not a summer holiday, a traditional celebration of the CFL right in the middle of July? So that bothered me. And then as I thought about how they could do it, sort of morphed into watching Hockey Day in Canada and thinking there really should be a football day in Canada to celebrate all of the high school players and the high school age leagues that are happening that we just don't talk about much in Canada. And I really think it's important for a couple of reasons. I think number one, you have to grow the sport. Now, with the age of concussion and conversations about concussion, I think that there are concerns that that youth football is going to take a hit. And I think that youth football needs to be talked about more, celebrated more, especially by TSN and the CFL. I mean, if the CFL and TSN are not pumping up youth football, then what are we doing here? Like, you need to be pumping up and sharing with people all of the amazing stories across this country, all of the CFL guys who played Canadian football, all the NFL guys who played Canadian football growing up. I mean, there are a million stories that could be shared interspersed between a couple of games between rivals on that day after the All-Star Game. You have you just follow the CBC Sportsnet Hockey Day formula. You have a central desk. You do some stories. You talk about all of the great things that youth football brings. The camaraderie and the leadership and the maturity. The fact that it's such a welcoming sport for people of all sizes and talent and cultures. One of the things that makes football so inclusive is for high school football is so many players are provided equipment and therefore don't have to pay for ice time, don't have to pay for equipment. And so you get a far more economically and culturally diverse group playing football than you do, say, hockey. And I think football should be commended for that. And I think people should hear the stories of kids who play football and love it. As we both know is the case so often, that these kids play football, prefer it to hockey, but of course football has a kind of limited pathway for a lot of people. But there are 100 stories of coaches and players and opportunities given that could be shared and be celebrated. And I think the Canadian Football League really should move forward and should really try and create something like this with TSN to celebrate football in Canada. To my mind, or I guess to my eye, I've never seen a celebration of Canadian youth football on television.
You see it at games when you attend. You see halftime.
Yeah, I mean they invite teams. I mean that's fine, but I mean I think that the stories need to be shared, especially to try and get people more aware of what's happening with youth football and the changes that have happened to the game and how much safer high school football is now than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And I just really feel like all of the people involved in football have done a great thing, and I don't think it gets the recognition it should. And I really feel like that TSN and the CFL should try and change how football is viewed. I think that it only makes financial sense to try and increase your audience, to increase the number of people playing Canadian football, which increases the number of people who go on to the CIS or NCAA. It is, you're going to get better players. The more people who play, the better players you're going to get. Like the way basketball has taken off in Canada. I think that there's a real concern about where youth football is heading, especially post-COVID in the high school games. I think there's a real concern about how many high schools are going to fire up their teams again whenever we get back to that. I think that's a reality because, we know that things were not trending terribly positively before COVID. I think the time to try and connect all the people who play football and coach football in the country to the CFL is now.
I love this idea, and I can't see why the CFL wouldn't love this idea and TSN wouldn't love this idea. The one thing I can see them resisting is how tied are you to the day after the All-Star game? Because we're talking about a weekday.
Yeah, I mean that was sort of like combining two of my pet interests. It doesn't have to be that day. I mean, you could do a Saturday if you wanted. I think that's perfectly fine too. I kind of thought it would be two issues at the same time, which would be great. But yeah, it doesn't have to be that.
I would love, I'm still fine with it being that Wednesday, but maybe like you say, maybe this is two different ideas instead of one idea. And on the day after the All-Star game, maybe you have a doubleheader that evening. And maybe we're talking about Football Day in Canada as being something down the road. But I think it's important that it doesn't get tied into other things that are already CFL things. Like, I don't think it should be Labor Day, because that's already a big deal in the CFL. It's already kind of got its...
And maybe you wait until September when schools are back and youth football is up and running. And that's a lot easier to make contact if you want to shoot pieces or you want to talk to a team or you want to have a live feed from a practice, that kind of stuff. I mean, all that can be done in September. So you're right. Maybe we talk about having some sort of highlight game the day after the All-Star game, and having you have the flexibility. Like maybe you look at who are the two best teams 2 weeks before the All-Star game, and you arrange a game or something like that. But maybe September is the best day for the football in Canada, because I think it would be, I think you'd have a lot of positive feedback, and I think it's crucial to make connections. There are lots and lots of youth football coaches who don't watch the CFL. There are lots of kids who play youth football who never watched the CFL and couldn't even name you the 9 teams. And if we can't convince youth football players to watch the CFL, that's a problem. I think the connection between the CFL and youth football needs to be stronger. And franchise-wise, I think that it's really important to try and to make these connections with the coaches and the players, and so that they see that they're part of a continuum. That this is not like, well, we play high school football and this is some other league that happens, and like this idea of the high school to CIS to CFL, and they feel connected to that. That would be, I think, a terrific result of this.
I think it's especially timely now, given all the conversations that have gone on over the last few weeks. I think people are more than ever wondering about the fate of youth sports and Canadian university football and high school football, and what would potential rule changes that we've talked about, what would that mean for Canadian universities or Canadian high schools and the Canadian game. So that sort of, I think, ties really nicely into what we're talking about. What would you think about starting the season with that day? Because I think the season starts, kids are still in school. What about opening like that? I know it's unconventional, but like NASCAR does something like that, where you basically open with one of your biggest events, the way they do with Daytona.
No, I think it's a little harder logistically, but not impossible. You can have, if you're looking to connect with high school teams, you could arrange that, sure. I mean, I think the fall's probably simpler, but you could do it at the beginning of the season and have it kind of as a kickoff to the season. Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I think it's a fantastic idea. It still boggles my mind that something like this isn't running. They've done little nods to things like this, like the games on the East Coast, for example. Those have started to turn into something. Last year's I was really excited about before the pandemic hit. The Touchdown Atlantic thing that was being arranged, and we had talked about going out there to watch that, and of course, obviously that never came to pass. None of it, but there are celebrations, and the league doesn't shy away from stuff like that, because they know that it draws positive attention and it draws in viewers that might not otherwise have watched. So I can't see why they wouldn't be on board with an idea like that.
Yeah, hopefully.
Well, that will do it for us on this episode of the X's and Argos podcast. Please don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, so our episodes always show up right there on your phone. For JB, my name's Ben Grant, saying so long, and may all your pre-snap reads be good ones. I'll see ya.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe.